welcome to everyone. Francis and Jesus of Nazareth. Francis the Pope, Jesus the Son of Man. Ever since Pope Francis departed from our midst in flesh and blood, I've been trying to come to terms with this reality, and in particular, to explain to myself the unusual, rare, incomparable fascination that this Pope had for me. I was very fond of Pope John Paul II, and I happened to be invited by the then Prime Minister Vajpayee to write or to produce a book commemorating the visit of Pope John Paul II to India in 1999. That book was published under the title Pilgrims to the Light, Encounters in a Shared Destiny. Obviously, I was deeply impressed and influenced by the spiritual personality of John Paul II. But far more than my feelings towards John Paul II, far more than I have felt ever about any pope or any spiritual leader of the Christian community, it's my fervent, respectful, affectionate feelings towards Pope Francis that I want to acknowledge. So therefore, I need to explain to myself, if not to others, the reason for this very deep response that Pope Francis evokes from me. I can't help it. Given the kind of person and spiritual leader that Pope Francis was, I cannot help responding to him in the manner that I have. So I need to explain to myself as to what accounts for this very deep impression, this kind of powerful impact he has left on me, why this very incomparable fascination. Today, I think I have an explanation, which I think it is worthwhile for me to share with those who care to listen and to understand. And that explanation is that whether the Catholics like it or not, whether some faction in the Catholic Church would agree with me or not, Pope Francis is perhaps the one Pope who tried in his own humble ways to emulate the example of Jesus Christ, and in fact to incarnate Jesus in our context today, which I consider to be the greatest challenge that any spiritually inclined person can ever accept or undertake. As Soren Kierkegaard wrote in one of his books, the greatest challenge imaginable in the world is to be a follower of Jesus Christ, because he confronts humanity with impossible ideals. And therefore, most people run away from Jesus, according to Soren Kierkegaard, despairing of ever being able to attain these impossible ideals with which Jesus confronted humanity. As Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote in his very famous book, The Cost of Discipleship, when Jesus calls someone, he calls him to come and die to the old and to be reborn to the new. So, one thing is absolutely certain, that is, those who have the slightest regard for and appreciation for the personality of Jesus cannot remain slavish to the status quo. This is absolutely certain. After all, Jesus was crucified by the custodians of the status quo because he was an insufferable danger, in their perception, to the perpetuation of the status quo. And all of us realize that perpetuating the status quo is completely inimical to the interest of humanity, because that creates serious, immovable impediments in the path of human progress. You can't perpetuate the status quo and progress at the same time. Either it is a status quo or it is progress. And Jesus, of course, believed in the infinite perfectibility of the human species. And together with that, he also believed in the spiritual necessity for humankind to progress. And therefore, he felt that commitment, blind, superstitious commitment to perpetuating the status quo was inimical to human interest. And he certainly believed that it was contrary to the will of God for humanity. So, therefore, Jesus made a stupendously significant choice. And if you don't understand that choice, you cannot understand the spiritual significance of the person and mission of Pope Francis. So, therefore, let me try and provide some clarity on this. What is the choice that Jesus made? To make a choice, there has to be at least two options. What are those two options? The two fundamental options before every human being, before humanity at large, are as follows. One, you can be part of the herd. You can blindly, uncritically, mechanically conform to all the set ways of the world. You can go on doing the things as they have ever been done from the beginning of history. And you can, to some extent, attain the advantage of belonging to a group, deriving the advantage thereof. Maybe security, maybe some material benefit, maybe some sense of identity, some sense of security, or whatever. But the cost of these attainments is far too prohibitive. The cost is your personality. You become a cog in the machine. You become a drop in the ocean. You become a mere plant in a forest. And you have to renounce your personality, particularly the uniqueness of your personality altogether, to be comfortable as a member of the herd. Being a member of the herd means you're like everybody else. You have renounced the uniqueness of your personality, whereas the most fundamental spiritual belief is that God creates everyone uniquely because there are special purposes underlying the creation of every human being. And therefore, being like everybody else, being part of the herd, being a cog in the machine, implies implicitly a complete renunciation of that spiritual role, the spiritual responsibility, or the spiritual significance that is potentially ascribed to us. So, this is one possibility, that we can belong to the herd, live as part of the herd, or as Soren Kierkegaard says, using a different metaphor, we can live like so many withered, one among the so many withered leaves in this world, to be blown away by the wind of time, to be carried into the deep forest and never to be seen thereafter. So our being here and not being there are all the same. Nothing special, nothing significant, nothing unique to us is ever expressed, and our life is wasted. This is one possibility. That's to remember this simply. Please remember this much: living as a member of the herd. In fact, that is how the believers are envisaged by the priestly class. You ask every priest, he will even today say, even though the idyllic and pastoral culture is long since gone, he would say that God has given me this fold of sheep. Members of a congregation are always seen by the priestly class as their sheep. Now, that's an insult. You would certainly tell me that Jesus himself, Jesus described himself as a good shepherd. But that was in a very different cultural context. That was the idyllic and pastoral culture, when people lived as shepherds, and therefore this metaphor was very close to their heart. I'm pretty sure and absolutely sure that if Jesus were alive today and he were to express himself, he would never project himself as the shepherd. He would use some other metaphor which is contextually relevant. You have not seen, I have not seen a shepherd. You don't see yourself, I don't think of myself as sheep. Then how come that we are still very happy with being described as the sheep of some priest or the other? I don't understand this one bit. And because the metaphors that we use are powerful in influencing our imagination, and therefore also our options and our perceptions about ourselves, we never insist on expressing the God-given uniqueness of our personality, which is a terrible loss. It's a terrible disservice that we do to ourselves. We are not meant to be anybody's sheep. We are created in the image and likeness of God. God, no sheep, no cow, no elephant, no animal was created in the image and likeness of God. If we are created in the image and likeness of God, we have a duty to say that we are nobody's sheep. We are human beings, individual, discrete individuals, imbued with very special responsibilities and purposes. And to the extent that we fulfill the purposes embedded in our creation, we attain fulfillment of our personal destiny. Otherwise, our life is wasted. Or using the words of the book of Revelation, the words used in connection with the church at Sardis, we have the name of being alive, but we are dead. We have the name of being alive, but we are dead. So this is one option. The other option is to become a well-defined, purposive individual whose personality is sacramental, that is to say, whose personality has a divine intent encoded in it, and therefore everything about our life is lived in accordance with that central purpose which is encoded in our personality, which accounts for its uniqueness, its beauty, its worth. And to live like that is actually to live the life of mission. Jesus chose this option. Jesus said fulfilling his Father's will is food and drink to him. And therefore, the secret of the power of Jesus' personality is not that he belonged to a herd, which is what people, his contemporaries, especially the priestly class, expected of him. The real secret of Jesus' power of personality is the fact that he lived the life of an authentic individual, imbued with a clear and powerful sense of divine purpose, and lived it to the end. And therefore, from the cross of Calvary, he could say with great conviction and joy, it is accomplished, it is finished, it is fulfilled. That's a hallmark of a powerful and fulfilled personality. No wonder the Roman centurion responded to the power of it and said, truly, you are the Son of God. Now, that is an entirely different option, radically different to the option I listed or I remarked at the beginning, namely being a part of a herd or being a cog in the machine or being an impersonal dry leaf among a heap of dry leaves. Or to use an Old Testament image from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 37, in the valley of dry bones, being one of the dry bones. These are the options. And therefore, Jesus chose the option, the path of being a divinely inspired, authentic personality, imbued with a very clear purpose, and he lived it to the full, to the last breath of his life. And that accounts for the uniqueness, the power, and the glory of Jesus' personality. And I'm absolutely convinced that Pope Francis was one who chose the path of Jesus Christ. What is required of the members of the Catholic Church is the first option. Be a part of the herd. Be a sheep, if you like, so that the priest can drive them here, there, and wherever they want. Never be an authentic, well-defined, discrete individual. Never be a divine personality. Never have your own understanding and your own well-defined mission for which you're accountable to God. Be completely confined, limited, and defined and directed by the church. The church is the ultimate authority. Church is greater than God. In fact, I heard a Catholic priest preach recently that the church traditions are far more important than the Bible, which is, as per Christian belief at least, a record of the periodic revelations of God. Though this process of revealing God's intention stopped at a certain point in time, which is something I find difficult to believe. I believe that God is a living reality, and therefore the revelation of God's intentions cannot stop at a particular point. It must continue. Otherwise, we cannot really believe that God is alive. If God is alive, he continues to reveal himself, and when God continues to reveal himself, newer and newer and newer realities, newer dimensions of truth will come to light. That's the significance of a personality which is rooted in the divine. And such a personality Francis was, and hence the difficulty that the Catholic Church, particularly certain highly articulate, powerful section of the Catholic Church had with him. And most of us are aware of the fact that a powerful movement was launched, and fortunately that did not fructify. A movement was launched to unseat Pope Francis because his spiritual vision and the mission that emanated from it both were considered to be highly dangerous to the Catholic Church, and therefore they felt that for the Church to survive, it was imperative to silence Pope Francis, and attempts were made to remove him from office. Thank God that did not succeed. So therefore, when I regard the life and mission of Pope Francis, I see the repetition of the same pattern that I see in Jesus Christ, namely, he who follows faithfully the path set out for him by the Creator, he who tries to be therefore an authentic person and therefore refuses to be part of the herd, but insists on living the purpose of one's creation in faithfulness to God day by day, such a person will be perceived as a danger to the establishment, and he will be dealt with brutally. And because Pope Francis was the supreme head of the church, the Catholic faction couldn't do much about it. They had to sit, grin, and bear it. But if a lesser person than Pope Francis had done and said what he did, they would certainly have been physically eliminated. As indeed happened, as indeed it happened to one of the popes before him. I don't want to go into those details. So therefore, my friends, in continuation of a previous video I have done and shared with you, I would raise a further question regarding the legacy that Pope Francis has left for all of us, not just for Catholics, but for Christians worldwide. That legacy is centered on a very important question. As a follower of Jesus Christ, which is what Christians are supposed to be in theory, as a follower of Jesus Christ, would you endeavor to be an authentic, well-defined, spiritually informed, and God-directed person and personality? Or will you be a mere member of the herd, which is looked after by the church, and where church is the supreme authority and God himself has to pay obeisance to the authority of the church? What exactly is the option before you? One thing I'm very certain about: he who consents to be a tame, unthinking, habitual member of a herd becomes a de facto slave and a coward. Unfortunately, rather than our faith makers brave people who have the courage of their convictions, our nurture in the so-called church culture, which is equated with Christian culture, has made us increasingly slaves and cowards. And Pope Francis was a living protest against this degradation of humanity in the name of Jesus Christ, who came to set the captives free. The ultimate irony in this context is that in the name of the one who came to set the captives free, in the name of the one who laid down his life in order to purchase meaningful freedom for humanity as a whole, a religion or many denominational churches have been created. All of them are vying with each other to destroy human freedom, particularly the freedom of conscience, the freedom to seek, to find, and to attain higher and higher stages of spiritual fulfillment. Degrading the so-called believers into mere a collective herd, the members of which having absolutely no right, no freedom to think for themselves. They are required only to conform, in spite of the fact that the Bible itself gives us very specific instructions that we should not conform. And I'm here referring to the second verse of the 12th chapter of the letter to Romans, where Paul writes emphatically to the Romans, and Romans represented the high culture of the times, the highest culture of the times. And therefore, this instruction is valid across the centuries and is particularly relevant to our times. Paul, in that passage, writes, "Do not conform to the pattern of the world, but rather be transformed by through the daily renewal of your mind, so that you may know that excellent and indispensable will of God for you. So Paul makes a contrast between two possibilities. One is to conform to the pattern of the world. The pattern of the world is conformity. The whole world works according to conformity. If you can examine any aspect of the world in which we live, it all runs according to conformity. Where Paul says, addressing the Romans, the high culture of the times, do not conform to this pattern of conformity, but rather be transformed, which is the exact opposite of the dynamic of conforming to the status quo. You conform to the status quo and you enter the new via transformation. The irony in the tragedy in the Christian context is people are all queuing up for transformation, but they want to attain transformation via conformity. A more absurd position than that I cannot imagine. So Paul is not confused unlike us. He says either you conform or you are transformed. And in order to be transformed, you have to daily seek that excellent and indispensable will of God, which means the will of God has to be daily revealed to you. It is ever new. God is ever new. God is not stale. God is not dead. God is not mummified and kept in the dim, distant past. He lives with you today. That's what Jesus said. Behold, I am with you unto the end of the world. Jesus lives. How can you, on the one hand, say when Easter comes that he lives today, and at the same time, deny people to follow and derive the benefit of the freshness that arises out of abiding in the Lord and the Lord abiding in him, abiding in the risen Christ. So Christians as believers must now wake up to this monstrous contradiction which has kept us so anemic, powerless, weak, and irrelevant. Pope Francis, in my opinion, was a powerful and authentic prophetic voice calling the entire church to repentance and renewal, so that the church is reborn in a fresh state of dynamic engagement with the world. And therefore, more than any pope before him, you found Pope Francis to be in a state of continual dialogue with, engagement with the realities of the world, which is also something that incensed the tradition worshipping custodians of the Catholic tradition. So therefore, in Pope Francis, we have embodied a very significant insight, namely, if you want to do justice to your own tradition, you have to transcend that tradition. If you remain a slave to your tradition via conformity, you will not be able to do justice to your tradition. The best way to fail your own tradition is to voluntarily agree to be confined to it and remain a slave of its patterns and prescriptions. If you want to fulfill the spiritual light embedded in your tradition, and there surely is spiritual light embedded in your tradition, Catholic tradition included, then you need a leader who transcends the trappings of the Catholic Church. And such a man Pope Francis was. And I believe it was God's mercy upon the Catholic Church that he gave to this church. Such an enlightened leader as Pope Francis was. And I can only hope and pray that the most powerful prophetic legacy that Pope Francis has left for the Catholic Church worldwide would be cherished and sustained. And the Church, relying on the guidance of the Holy Spirit, would enter more and more deeply and fully into the possibilities of this new heritage, this new spiritual vision, this new spiritual relevance that Pope Francis has created for the Catholic Church. In that sense, I would like to be part of that truly Catholic Church. And I have to say here that the present Catholic Church is a long, long, long way away from the true Catholic Church. I wish the church would become Catholic. And the only way in which the church can become truly Catholic is by becoming Christ-centered, because there was none more Catholic than Jesus Christ. And it was precisely because Jesus was not a Catholic that he was truly Catholic. Even the confines of Judaism could not hold him. Even the confines of death could not hold him. If the risen Christ is acknowledged, and obeyed, then a church has no option but to become truly Catholic. And it should begin with the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church must become truly Catholic, and that would actually inaugurate a significant, glorious phase in the spiritual renewal of all other churches. Therefore, I pray that God may guide the selection of the next Pope of the Catholic Church as a successor to Pope Francis, who would have the spiritual personality, the stature, as well as accountability to God and the courage born of that accountability to continue the spiritual mission of Pope Francis and take it to a stage closer to fulfillment. So my best wishes to the Catholic Church, and I wish and pray that the paths that Pope Francis has inaugurated would not be forgotten, but pursued and pursued vigorously. All the very best.